The year is 480 BC. Somewhere on a hillside, above a narrow coastal pass, in central Greece, a king sits on a golden throne. Below him, the greatest army the ancient world has ever assembled stretches back beyond the horizon. 80,000 soldiers, warriors from Egypt, Babylon, India, and a dozen conquered nations, and blocking their path, in a gap between a cliff face and the sea, so narrow that two carts cannot pass side by side, a few thousand Greeks. Most people know what happens next. 300 Spartans, 1 million Persians, a narrow pass, heroes who chose death over retreat. Almost every detail of that story is wrong. There were not 300 soldiers at Thermopylae. The Persian army was not 1 million. And the Spartans did not fall because they were outnumbered. This is the real story. To understand what happened at Thermopylae, you first need to understand who the Spartans actually were. Because the reality is both more extraordinary and more brutal than any film has ever shown. Sparta was a city-state in southern Greece. From birth, every Spartan male was evaluated by a council of elders. Infants deemed too weak were carried to a cliff face on the edge of Mount Taygetos and left there. Those who survived entered the agoge, the Spartan state education system, at age 7. The agoge was not a school in any sense we would recognize. Boys lived in military barracks. They slept on reed mats they cut themselves. They were given insufficient food and actively encouraged to steal to survive. If caught stealing, they were punished, not for the theft, but for being caught. The lesson was not morality. The lesson was competence. At 17, they entered the Cryptia, sent alone into the countryside, with nothing but a short blade, told to survive, to hunt, and above all, not to be seen. At 30, they were considered full citizens. A Spartan warrior, standing in the pass at Thermopylae, had been training for that moment for over 20 years. They were not superhumans, but they were, without any question, the most thoroughly prepared professional soldiers in the ancient world. And Leonidas, king of Sparta, chose 300 of them. He selected men who each had living sons, so their family lines would continue after they were gone. Because he understood, before they ever left Sparta, that they were not coming back. Now let us talk about what the Greeks were actually facing. Xerxes I was the king of kings of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. In 480 BC, that empire was the largest and most powerful political entity on the face of the earth. It stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, from the Aral Sea to the cataracts of the Nile. 30 million people lived under Persian rule. For the invasion of Greece, the Greek historian Herodotus gave the Persian force a number of 5 million men. Later ancient sources ranged from 800,000 to 2.5 million. Modern historians, using supply chain analysis and road capacity calculations, have determined that none of those numbers are logistically possible. The ancient roads of northern Greece could not have fed or moved an army of anything close to that size. The most carefully defended scholarly consensus places the Persian invasion force at between 80,000 and 100,000 fighting men. Still, the largest army that had ever marched into Greek territory. Among them, 10,000 soldiers known as the Immortals, the elite personal guard of Xerxes himself. They were called Immortals because whenever one fell, he was immediately replaced, so the unit's strength never diminished. Xerxes had spent years preparing this invasion. He ordered a canal dug through a peninsula to avoid a dangerous sea route. He ordered bridges of lashed-together boats built across the Hellespont. When a storm destroyed the first bridge, Xerxes ordered the sea to be whipped 300 times as punishment. Then, he built a second bridge. This was the man, and this was the army marching toward Greece. And between them and everything beyond stood a narrow mountain pass, the Hot Gates, Thermopylae. The Greek decision to defend Thermopylae was not a last resort. It was a strategy, and it was brilliant. The pass, at its narrowest point, was between 4 and 20 meters wide. On one side, a sheer cliff. On the other, the sea. There was no way around it without crossing into the mountains above. And in that confined space, Xerxes' advantage of 80,000 men was almost entirely irrelevant. He could only send a few hundred soldiers forward at a time because there was simply no more room. Greek hoplite warfare, the style of fighting practiced by the Spartans and their allies, was designed exactly for this situation. The Aspis shield, large, round, and overlapping with the shields of the men on either side, formed a continuous bronze wall. From between those shields, 8-foot spears extended forward. The men behind pressed into those in front, creating a single, coordinated, crushing mass. On day one, Xerxes sent the Medes, among his finest soldiers, into the pass. They were slaughtered. The Greeks' longer spears, their superior armor, and the narrowness of the ground turned every Persian numerical advantage into a liability. More Persians simply meant more men waiting to die in the same narrow space. Herodotus records that Xerxes, watching from a throne on a nearby hill, leapt to his feet 3 times in fear for his men. He then sent the Immortals, his personal elite guard, the finest soldiers in the Persian Empire. The Immortals were also repulsed. Day 2 was almost identical. The Greeks rotated their forces, fresh allied soldiers taking turns at the wall while the Spartans rested. After 48 hours, Xerxes had lost thousands of men. The Greek line had barely moved, and then a man came to the Persian camp after dark. His name was Ephialtes. He was a local man, a Greek, from the region whose mountains rose directly above the pass. He knew every path, every goat trail, every shadow in that rock face that would not appear on any map. He offered to show the Persians a path, the Anapaea path that wound up through the mountains above the pass and descended behind the Greek position. For a reward, Leonidas had known this path existed. He had placed a force of 1,000 Phocian soldiers at its head to guard it. That night, Xerxes sent the Immortals up the mountain under cover of darkness. Moving in silence, guided by Ephialtes, they climbed through the hours before dawn. At first light, they encountered the Phocian guards. The Phocians, shocked by the sudden appearance of 10,000 Persian soldiers materializing from the mountain, retreated to higher ground to make their own last stand. The Immortals did not pursue them. They had no interest in the Phocians. They continued down the mountain path toward the rear of Leonidas' position. A runner reached Leonidas at dawn with the news the path had been betrayed. Leonidas made his final decisions quickly. He dismissed the allied Greek forces. The Thespians, the Thebans, the Corinthians, and the others who had fought beside the Spartans for 2 days. he ordered them south to rejoin the main Greek army. Their lives were worth preserving. The war was not yet over. He kept the 300 Spartans, and he kept the 700 Thespians, who refused to leave, whose city, they knew, would be the next in the Persian line of march, who chose to stay for reasons that were entirely their own. The Spartans and Thespians moved forward, past the wall, into the wider ground beyond. They were no longer trying to hold a defensive position. They were trying to kill as many Persians as possible before the end. The Persians attacked from both directions, from the front in the pass, and from the rear, where the immortals were descending the mountain. Ancient accounts describe a battle of extraordinary ferocity. The Greeks fought to a final stand on a small hill, with broken spears, with swords, and when weapons were gone, with their hands. Leonidas himself died in the fighting. A brutal struggle for his body followed. The Greeks defended it to the last man. The pass fell. The Persian dead, by ancient accounts, numbered 20,000. In 3 days, a few thousand Greeks had killed 20,000 of the greatest army in the ancient world. And it cost every one of them their lives. The Persians marched through. They reached Athens. They burned it. And then, 3 weeks later, the Greek fleet, under the Athenian general Themistocles, met the Persian navy in the narrow straits near the island of Salamis and destroyed it. Without supply lines by sea, Xerxes was forced to withdraw. The Persian forces left behind were defeated the following year at Plataea. Greece survived, and in surviving, it continued the development of the ideas that would form the foundation of Western civilization. Democracy, philosophy, mathematics, medicine. The intellectual inheritance that all of us in 2026 are still living inside. Thermopylae did not win the war. It bought the time for Salamis to be possible. And without those 3 days, there may have been no Salamis. Without Salamis, there may have been no Greece, not because of 300 Spartans, but because of over 7,000 Greeks who chose to stand. The site is still there. You can visit it today in central Greece. A stone inscription written by the poet Simonides within living memory of the battle reads in 11 words, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Subscribe to WarFold. We cover one battle, one story, one truth, every single week. And I will see you next time.